Neuroplasticity is the fundamental mechanism by which human beings change, not just mentally, but behaviorally, emotionally, and even physically. At its core, neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It is the biological basis for learning, memory, habit formation, and transformation. For most of human history, we believe the brain was fixed after a certain age, but research over the last few decades has completely overturned that myth. The truth is, your brain is always capable of change if you engage with it properly. This doesn't mean change is automatic or effortless. It means the capacity for change is embedded within you, waiting to be activated through the right conditions. When you consistently engage in a behavior, your brain begins to create and strengthen the neural pathways that support that behavior. For example, when you practice focusing your attention, learning a new skill, or managing stress through breath or mindset, your brain interprets these patterns as important and begins to rewire to support them. But the opposite is also true. When you reinforce distraction, avoidance, or negative thinking, those patterns become hardwired as well. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between good or bad habits. It simply reinforces what you do repeatedly. This process is governed by both structural and functional changes in the brain. Structurally, dendrites and synapses grow and rearrange to form more efficient pathways. Functionally, changes occur in how brain regions communicate. Certain areas become more dominant, others less reactive, depending on the task and intention. Neuroplasticity is especially powerful during moments of heightened attention, emotional significance, or challenge. That's why states of deep focus, novelty, or even discomfort are critical. They signal to the brain that something important is happening, which boosts the brain's learning chemicals like dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. Importantly, you can't just think about changing. You must create the conditions for change through action. The brain doesn't rewire by passive reflection alone. It requires direct interaction with experience. If you want to become more disciplined, you must practice discipline. If you want to reduce anxiety, you must consistently train your nervous system through breathwork, visual tools, or behavioral shifts. Change begins when you take ownership of the fact that your thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are all interconnected, and that your biology is designed to respond to repetition. The power of neuroplasticity lies in its neutrality. It will work for or against you depending on how you engage it. Every day you are shaping your brain through what you focus on, what you ignore, how you speak to yourself, how you move your body, and what you choose to repeat. This means that change isn't about one massive transformation. It's about aligning your small, consistent behaviors with the version of yourself you want to become. And because of neuroplasticity, that version is always within reach. You don't need to become someone new. You need to engage the systems that already exist inside you and guide them with intention. The first 90 minutes after waking are a biologically critical period in which your brain and body are most sensitive to environmental input. What you do during this time can profoundly shape your cognitive performance, mood, energy, and focus throughout the day. This period is regulated by your circadian rhythm, an internal 24-hour clock that governs the timing of nearly every biological process, including hormone release, temperature regulation, and brainwave activity. In the early part of the day, particularly upon waking, your brain experiences a natural rise in cortisol. While cortisol is often misunderstood as a stress hormone, during the morning it plays a positive role. It helps you wake up, become alert, and begin cognitive processing. This surge is known as the cortisol awakening response, and it is essential for healthy brain function. But this response is sensitive. It can be either supported or disrupted depending on your behaviors. One of the most effective ways to synchronize your brain and body during this window is through light exposure. Getting sunlight in your eyes within 30 to 60 minutes of waking stimulates specialized cells in the retina called melanopsin-containing ganglion cells. These cells send a signal to the brain's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, telling it that it's daytime. This triggers a cascade of hormonal and neurological processes that increase alertness and set a timer for melatonin release later that night, which helps you fall asleep. This means that early light exposure not only boosts your energy and focus for the day, but also helps you sleep better at night. Artificial indoor lighting doesn't have the same intensity or spectrum, so natural light, preferably outdoors, is ideal. Movement is another key component. Light physical activity, such as a brisk walk, mobility exercises, or even a few minutes of stretching, activates your vestibular system and increases blood flow to the brain. This primes the nervous system for focus and learning. It also helps regulate insulin sensitivity and metabolic processes that are more active early in the day. Importantly, movement in combination with light amplifies the wake-up signals to the brain, creating a more robust shift into alertness. You're not just waking up your body, you're literally increasing electrical activity in areas of the brain responsible for attention and working memory. What you consume mentally during these 90 minutes also matters. Because your brain is more plastic and impressionable early in the day, you want to avoid high doses of distraction, emotional reactivity, or meaningless content. Instead, this is the time for setting intentions, reviewing your goals, or consuming information that is aligned with your long-term development. This primes the brain for high-level cognitive tasks and promotes neurochemical balance. Activities like journaling, meditation, breathwork, or goal visualization take advantage of this window and signal to your brain that you are in control of your day. Even caffeine use can be optimized. While it's common to reach for coffee immediately upon waking, delaying caffeine intake by 60 to 90 minutes allows your natural cortisol to rise and fall more naturally. This leads to more sustained energy and prevents the mid-morning crash many people experience. Waiting also preserves your body's natural alertness systems rather than replacing them with stimulants too early. In sum, the first 90 minutes after waking are not just a routine, they are a window into your biology. When used intentionally, they provide a foundation of neurological alignment that enhances focus, energy, mood, and long-term mental health. You're either training your system for resilience and clarity or allowing chaos and distraction to program your brain. The choice is always yours. Stress is often misunderstood as something purely negative or harmful, but from a biological perspective, stress is actually data, a form of feedback from the body and brain that indicates that something important is happening. Stress is your nervous system's response to challenge, uncertainty, or demand. It activates systems designed to heighten awareness, increase energy availability, and improve the ability to respond quickly. This response is ancient and adaptive. When you experience stress, your body releases a cascade of chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, that prepare you to take action. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate increases, and blood is redirected to muscles and essential organs. The brain becomes more alert. This process, known as the stress response, isn't inherently harmful. It's how you interpret and respond to it that determines whether it's destructive or transformative. If you perceive stress as something that overwhelms or paralyzes you, it can become chronic and damaging. But if you see stress as a signal to engage, an indicator that you are being stretched toward growth, then it becomes fuel. Stress tells you that you're operating at your edge. In neuroscience, this is the optimal zone for learning and adaptation. When stress is moderate and intermittent, it enhances cognitive flexibility, emotional resilience, and even physical performance. It signals to the brain that the current challenge is meaningful, which leads to stronger memory, encoding, and learning. It is during these moments of stress that neuroplasticity is often highest, especially when combined with deliberate effort and focus. Stress also plays a critical role in strengthening the autonomic nervous system. When you face a difficult situation and stay with it, rather than avoiding or escaping, you teach your body how to tolerate higher levels of activation. This process, called stress inoculation, builds long-term resilience. Over time, your threshold for what feels overwhelming rises. You become more composed, more capable, and more confident in the face of adversity. You also reduce the likelihood of chronic stress disorders because your system learns how to return to balance more efficiently. This adaptive stress response is a skill that can be trained through exposure and reframing. Tools like breathwork, cold exposure, focused attention, and visualization are powerful ways to intentionally induce manageable stress. These practices, when done consistently, train the nervous system to handle pressure with greater control. They also shift the brain's relationship to discomfort, from something to avoid to something to master. When you recognize that stress is not your enemy, but your teacher, you take back control over your state. You begin to shape your environment and responses in a way that enhances your growth. Importantly, the brain doesn't change without some level of agitation or intensity. Calmness is necessary for recovery, but it's stress that initiates adaptation. If everything feels easy, your nervous system is not being pushed to rewire. Growth happens when challenge meets purpose. When you have a clear reason for facing discomfort, a vision, a mission, or a value system, you're more likely to stay in the fight. That emotional context releases neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine, which make your brain more plastic, more alert, and more focused. So instead of seeing stress as a problem, view it as a biological invitation, an opportunity to become more. Stress is not a flaw in your system. It is a message that something important is happening, and that now is the time to pay attention, to act deliberately, and to grow intentionally. When interpreted this way, stress becomes not just something to manage, but something to work with. It becomes the very signal that you are evolving. The idea that motivation must come before action is one of the most persistent myths in human behavior. In reality, neuroscience tells a very different story. Action precedes motivation. The brain is not waiting for you to feel inspired before it starts mobilizing the chemicals that drive behavior. Instead, it is the act of engaging, of starting, even when it's uncomfortable, that activates the systems in the brain responsible for focus, effort, and persistence. When you move your body, initiate a task, or even begin planning a course of action, your brain responds by releasing specific neurochemicals that reinforce and sustain effort. Chief among these is dopamine, the molecule of motivation and pursuit. But dopamine is not triggered by inspiration alone. It is triggered by movement, progress, and challenge. Dopamine release doesn't just feel good. It acts as a signal that you are moving towards something meaningful. The more you act, the more dopamine is released, reinforcing the behavior and making you more likely to continue. This is a feedback loop. You take action, dopamine increases, and motivation follows. This loop doesn't start with feelings. It starts with behavior. The moment you take that first step, whether it's opening a book, lacing your shoes, or confronting a difficult task, you tell your brain that the goal matters. The brain responds with chemicals that increase alertness, drive, and energy. This is not wishful thinking. It is a well-documented biological mechanism involving the basal ganglia, the prefrontal cortex, and the mesolimbic dopamine system. Acetylcholine, another key neurochemical involved in focus, is also released when you begin engaging deeply with a task. This sharpens your attention and strengthens neural connections related to that activity. Meanwhile, norepinephrine, associated with alertness and readiness, boosts your ability to resist distraction and stay on task. None of these chemicals are released in meaningful quantities when you're passively waiting for motivation. The system is designed for motion. That's why action, even imperfect, small action, initiates the entire cascade of biological processes that fuel persistence and progress. This principle has enormous implications for how you structure your habits and daily life. If you wait for the perfect mindset, the right energy, or an emotional breakthrough to begin, you're bypassing the very process that creates those states. Instead, begin before you feel ready. Start small, start messy, but start. Even 2 minutes of focused effort can initiate the chemical pathways that generate momentum. Once engaged, your brain shifts into a different operating state, one of purpose, clarity, and commitment. With each repetition, the behavior becomes more automatic, less reliant on willpower, and more rooted in your identity. This is how high performers operate, not because they always feel motivated, but because they understand the biology of action. They know that starting is the key, and that motivation catches up. Your brain is designed to reward progress, not procrastination. Every time you push past resistance, you strengthen the neural circuits responsible for discipline and goal-directed behavior. This is how habits are formed, how goals are achieved, and how lives are changed, not through waiting, but through doing. You don't need to feel perfect to begin. You don't need to eliminate fear, doubt, or fatigue. What you need is to engage. The moment you start acting, you are already changing your brain chemistry, shifting your state, and building the momentum you thought you needed beforehand. This is the biological truth. Motivation is not the prerequisite for action. It is the result. Repetition paired with emotion is one of the most powerful mechanisms the brain uses to encode behavior. identity, and long-term transformation. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for what matters, what experiences to prioritize, what patterns to reinforce, and what information to discard. When something is repeated often, the brain starts building strong neural pathways to support that behavior. But when that repetition is combined with emotional intensity, whether that emotion is excitement, purpose, frustration, or even fear, the encoding process becomes far more powerful. This is because the brain uses emotion as a signal to determine importance. Emotion tells your nervous system, pay attention, this matters. As a result, those experiences become hardwired more quickly and deeply. This is the foundation of how identity shifts. You are not born with a fixed sense of self. Identity is shaped by repeated behaviors and reinforced beliefs over time. The more frequently you show up for a behavior and the more emotionally invested you are while doing it, the more your brain begins to integrate that behavior into your core sense of who you are. For example, if you consistently train yourself to face discomfort and do difficult things, even in small doses, your brain begins to identify you as someone who is resilient and capable. This isn't just mindset, it's biology. Emotional repetition strengthens the synaptic connections between neurons, making certain behaviors feel natural, automatic, and effortless over time. In the absence of emotion, repetition still works, but it's slower and less effective. Emotion acts like a highlighter for the brain. It tells the nervous system which experiences are most meaningful, and it accelerates the plasticity process. This is why goal setting, visualization, and habit building are more effective when tied to a deep sense of purpose. When your actions are emotionally charged, when they are connected to something larger than comfort or routine, they engage the neuromodulators that amplify learning and change. Dopamine surges when you feel emotionally aligned with your actions, especially when those actions represent progress. Acetylcholine increases when you're focused and emotionally engaged, helping to hardwire new behaviors. Even stress hormones, when activated in the right context, support the consolidation of memory and skill. This also explains why emotionally traumatic or significant experiences, both positive and negative, are so vividly remembered and can alter behavior for years. The nervous system prioritizes emotionally charged moments and builds lasting pathways around them. You can use this to your advantage by choosing to make your daily behaviors emotionally meaningful. You can add music, movement, breathwork, or reflection to reinforce emotional engagement. You can visualize the outcomes that truly matter to you before acting. These seemingly small adjustments can multiply the impact of repetition, turning routine habits into transformational rituals. This process is not about pretending or performing. It's about aligning your nervous system with who you're becoming. Each time you engage with repetition and emotion, you are signaling to your brain that this is your future. You're not just repeating a behavior, you're rehearsing an identity. Over time, that identity becomes easier to access. You no longer have to force it. It becomes who you are. This is how transformation becomes sustainable. It doesn't rely on endless willpower or inspiration. It relies on the biology of reinforcement. It is slow at first, but exponential with consistency. So if you want to change your life, don't only focus on what you do, focus on how deeply connected you are while doing it. Bring your attention, your emotion, your intention into your daily habits. The more you repeat actions with emotional clarity, the faster your nervous system will adapt and the stronger your new identity will become. This is not just psychology, it's neurobiology. It's how real, lasting change takes root. Your nervous system is constantly shaping your reality, and every behavior, every thought, every repetition contributes to the internal wiring that defines who you are. This process doesn't just happen on its own. It's guided by the signals you send through your daily actions. That's why aligning your habits with your biology is not optional if you want real change. The nervous system is governed by rules, and when you work with those rules, rather than against them, you gain access to a level of control and transformation that most people never tap into. You already have the systems in place. Your job is to activate and direct them with purpose. The key to taking control of your life lies in understanding that these biological systems respond best to consistency and intentionality. You don't need to completely overhaul your life in a single day. What matters is whether your repeated behaviors are aligned with the person you want to become. Each time you perform a behavior, You reinforce the neural circuits that support it. That reinforcement is not based on willpower. It's based on biology. Neurons that fire together wire together. And when you add meaning or direction to those behaviors, your brain flags those circuits as high priority, allocating more resources towards strengthening them. This is how change happens, one small, intentional behavior at a time, executed consistently enough to signal to your nervous system that it's important. The nervous system doesn't just store habits. It stores identity. Your sense of self is built through the actions you take and the emotions you associate with them. So if you repeat behaviors that are tied to avoidance, distraction, or self-doubt, those patterns become stronger. On the other hand, if you build routines grounded in discipline, presence, and emotional clarity, those patterns become dominant. Your biology doesn't judge, it simply adapts to what you do most frequently. And that adaptation creates a feedback loop. The more you act in alignment with your goals, the more your brain and body shift to support that identity. Eventually, the behavior becomes automatic. The effort decreases, but the results compound. This is why self-directed neuroplasticity is such a powerful concept. You are not a passive recipient of your circumstances. You are an active participant in the shaping of your brain and therefore your future. Every time you deliberately engage in a habit with intention, especially under conditions of stress or fatigue, you increase your capacity to operate under pressure. You teach your nervous system that you are capable of maintaining direction even when it's hard. That builds resilience. That builds identity. That is how confidence is formed, not through empty affirmations, but through consistent alignment between your behaviors and your values. Moreover, when you use tools like breathwork, cold exposure, focused movement, and deep visual engagement, you're not just optimizing performance, you're influencing how your nervous system regulates energy, emotion, and attention. These tools create shifts in your autonomic balance, allowing you to downregulate stress or upregulate focus on demand. When practiced regularly, they make your nervous system more adaptable, more responsive, and more capable of handling life's complexity. You stop being a victim of your biology and start becoming its operator. Everything you do is either reinforcing the present version of yourself or building the next one. That's not an abstract idea, it's a measurable biological truth. You already have the systems you need, the pathways for focus, resilience, clarity, and purpose. They exist in you now. The question is whether you are activating them consistently. When you begin to use your nervous system with intention, and when your behaviors reflect who you want to be, not just what feels easy, you step into a state of alignment. And in that state, transformation is not just possible, it becomes inevitable.